us born in Leicester before the Second World War can recall a time when we never saw a parking warden. Few of us had cars. We never saw a TV aerial. No one had a TV set. And a day trip to Skegness was about as far as most of us would travel. You could always fly by airship. Here's the R101 passing over Leicester in 1930. Sadly, shortly after this, it would crash in France. So when we were kids, what did we do with our free time?
We'd skip for hours, because they're big young, you know, girls, and won't be tired if any boys jumped in the rope.
Well, I lived off Evington Road and played in the street off Evington Road, and we played sort of hopscotch, tip cat, that's with a bat and a wooden peg. Whip and top was very, very popular indeed. Marbles came along and we played marbles in the street.
But then, of course, cigarette cards. We'd set the cigarette cards up, leaning against the wall, on the pavement, leaning against the wall there, and we'd skim cards to try and knock them down, and if you knocked them down, you'd won them.
There's never any traffic. In the middle of the road, there was a manhole, and we used to put a ball on there, and somebody had to go and catch it. While they were catching it, everybody else hid. And if you could... they left the ball there, and if you could get from your hiding place without them seeing you and getting the ball, you had won.
It was our proud boast that we could get from the Humberstone Road to Syston Street, just going through entries and crossing people's gardens and coming out the other side, over walls, into cucumber frames and that sort of thing on the way. They used to chase you, but they stood no chance. We were street urchins.
They were pulling the old Charles Street down, where it used to be a narrow little street, and they were pulling it out. There used to be a little courtyard, and they were pulling them down, and of course we were on the demolition playing on it. And this policeman come round, who'd been on point duty. They used to wear big white gloves then, and he come round and he copped us. And clever me, I'm on this here little roof thinking he ain't seen me. But he did see me. He said, "Come on down, you." And when I come down, he brought that one round, and then he brought the other one round to get me too.
Round our neighbourhood, if you saw a policeman, he was considered somebody not to be afraid of, but you run away. I mean, you no time for them. I mean, they were strict. You see, they weren't sort of bounded by laws that they got to keep to. I mean, they give you a clip across the ear if you did anything wrong, and that'd be it.
I can remember the gang sort of warfare, particularly at bonfire night, where you were allowed to build bonfires in the middle of the street. Can you imagine doing that now? In the middle of where I live, Kingston Road, you could have a bonfire, and in the next street you could have a bonfire. And then there would be raiding parties, raiding one another's bonfires, and you had to have somebody on guard, or otherwise you'd find your bonfire lit well before November the 5th.
Not that we spent all our time on the streets.
I've been every park in Leicester, as you might say, when the children were little, because you see, it was the only pleasure you had. Just taking your children out, meeting them from school and taking them on the park sooner than they should be in the street all the time. And taking a bottle of tea with a sock round it, because you can never afford a flask.
Abbey Park had been opened in 1882. Weston Park and Spinney Hill Park were soon to follow. For Leicester, this was the start of municipal leisure provision, though some people still felt the need to venture further.
It was an adventure to go out as far as Bradgate or Gruby. I mean, that was like a week's holiday, you see. There wasn't the transport, of course. You got to walk because there were only odd buses. Well, they weren't really buses in those days. Charabancs, and that's a lot of it, you see.
Closer to the city, you could always find somewhere to get away from it all. It was probably the British weather, as well as changing public tastes, that finished off Leicester's Lidos. With more indoor pools and sports centres built in the city, Kenwood Pool in Knighton and the Humberstone Lido closed down in the 1960s. On a fine day in the 30s, Mr. Bolton, the owner of Chillproof, was likely to shut the factory and invite the workers to cool down at his lake beside Manor Road, Oadby. The workers were probably glad of the break, although the Saturday half-day was well established in Leicester before the Second World War. Most factory workers regularly put in over 50 hours a week. Bank holidays were eagerly awaited, though of course not everyone was in work.
We used to have the people walking the streets begging, and I can always remember somebody coming down Turner Road. He was in full Highland stuff and he was playing the bagpipes, and I've never taken to bagpipes. It just terrified me, but they just did anything to just get a few pence.
I remember Wharf Street, a shop, shoes, a shilling a bundle. I mean, could you imagine shoes, a shilling a bundle? You bought a bundle and I think I remember, to my horror, standing in the doorway with my mother holding clothes up to me to see if they fitted, and dreading a girl coming by who I knew, you know, a sweetheart.
However, if you were in work, what better for a street or factory outing than a charabanc?
It's a very long open-top vehicle and has a very long running board, and each of the row of seats has a little door. So you climb onto the running board and, you know, go along about 5 or 6 of you, but everyone had a little door. That was a charabanc. And if it rained, the driver stopped and got out and pulled this canvas hood over the top, but didn't have any sides. So if you were unfortunate to sit on the outside, like, you got wet.
With a garage on St Peter's Road and a booking office on Humberstone Gate, Highfields Motor Company was one of the companies offering outings all over the country. You could always watch their trips on lantern slides. What could beat that?
Going to the Leicester Palace once a week, which was sort of highlighting it. I can remember the row end at Leicester Palace. And that was picked because there was more legroom than anywhere else. I went all over the palace for years and years and years. If I was well off, I went in the hotel. I had a box sometimes. Of course, this was a bit later, when I was thinking about getting married. And I went in the gods, where it seemed a mile to the stage, tuppence. You sat on just bare form. I saw Gracie Fields before she went to London. She came to Leicester Palace, and we didn't think very much to her for a start. But then towards the end, she sang, and she made a name.
Edna's first job was at the palace on Belgrave Gate.
Well, I went as an usherette first off, and then Truman Towers was the manager there then, and he asked me to go on the phone. Well, I'd never seen a phone, and I thought, oh, I don't do this job. But I did go on the phones, and then eventually I went to the advanced booking office, and I started at the Palace at 14. I told them I was 16. They said it was rather young for a business like that, but I carried on till I was married.
Besides the palace, you could always visit the Theatre Royal on Horsefair Street or the Opera House on Silver Street. Besides its theatres, at one time, Leicester had around 30 cinemas. It was estimated in 1917 that about half the population went to the cinema at least once a week.
It was tuppence to get to the cinema, Twopenny Rush, you should say, in Tudor Road. You'd get a full afternoon's entertainment for tuppence.
I remember going to the cinema very, very clearly because I went to the Evington cinema, and of course it was silent when I first went to the cinema. We didn't have any talkies, we had little captions coming up, and I remember, you know, shouting, and along with all the others, he's behind you and look out for the gun.
We used to have it 3 times a week, a change of programme in the little cinema near us. And you would go 3 times a week for about 2pence. You'd sit on the bench, and if you got on the end, you could get knocked off during the excitement, you know, when the train getting nearer and nearer, and then stop. Oh, to be continued next week.
I wasn't able to go to cinemas and things like that. My parents didn't think that wasn't suitable. I found out much later that they'd always been to cinemas, but they were not for me.
Even during the First World War and the subsequent world slump, leisure activities in Leicester continued pretty much as usual. Radio, theatres and cinemas all gained in popularity. At the time, the cost of an adult cinema ticket was about the price of a pint of beer, and the cinema was often a cheap alternative to the pub. Legislation had shortened licensed hours and reduced the strength of beer, as well as pushing up the price. Smoking, on the other hand, was on the increase, doubling between 1914 and 1938. By the end of World War II, 80% of men and 40% of women were regular smokers. More people were taking an active interest in sport. And more people were paying to become spectators. Gambling too was on the increase, not just on the horses, but on the dogs and the football pools. And don't forget food.
Hot peas and sausages and
Drumity,
pig's belly,
sheep's head,
Home-rendered lamb.
chocolate biscuits and a cup of milk.
condensed milk spread on bread and butter.
Or, if you could afford a special treat, why not visit one of Leicester's cafes? Winn's had a chain of coffee houses and bakeries in Leicester, including the original Turkey Cafe on Granby Street.
There were a lot of cafes in those days, particularly one which doesn't seem to remember, people don't remember very much. It was Kenwood. It was a small one up at Granby Street, and it was lovely, all old timber inside, and they all had an air there which they haven't got now. Of course, no self-service in those days.
Eventually, Winn's would sell the Oriental to Woolworths and the rest of the chain to Bruciani's. Many people still remember the Oriental for the ballroom upstairs. Dances before the war were often teetotal with very strict rules.
You were ordered off the floor if you didn't do the right dancing then. You couldn't do this jitterbug and all this twisting and that. You all had to go round in a sequence, you know, round the ballroom and do the reel. Or you were ordered off the floor. You'd pick up a partner. I used to go with a girlfriend, you know, and you perhaps, if you didn't, you'd dance together.
We hated the girls to see us shabby. We couldn't go around with our trousers bottoms hanging out like some of them do today, or all frayed round the edges. We were all, we had all that blue cream on our hair and really toughed up, you know.
There was a fashion at one time when I went, and you had a long fringe. You had a straight dress and a long fringe and a rose just there. And we thought we were at the end of those. And you'd dance with anybody that came up to you. And we never made a thing of it, you know, it was just fun.
Sometimes we'd go dancing at Mablethorpe Hall after we'd finished work, and you'd walk home at perhaps 1 or 2 in the morning, but there was nobody had molested you or anything like that. You wasn't frightened to walk home. I used to walk home right to Belgrave.
For many people, leisure activities still revolved around church or chapel. And for a growing number, the Scouts and the Guides.
May the 8th, 1926, and I decided there and then that I wanted to be a cub and go on to be a Scout. My childhood was, well, I was, you know, without many things, and I remember Mother having to scrimp and scrape, taking extra washing to provide my uniform. I was invited to go to London for a particular do, and I told my mother that it was going to cost 10 shillings. That's 50 pence today. And she said, well, of course you can go, but I've no idea where the money's coming from. The St George's Day Parade was a very important function in the life of Scouting because it was on the nearest Sunday to St George's Day, and all Cubs Scouts, Bencher Scouts, leaders were encouraged and expected to go to church for that particular occasion, but also to reaffirm their Scout promise.
In the 30s, the Leicestershire Cooperative Society staged gala days at the De Montfort Hall Gardens and Ayleston Meadows.
Once a year, if you belonged to the Penny Bank, they'd have this outing. Because you see, we all had a penny bank book at the co-op. Every Monday, you took your coppers. And if you got empty jam jars, you got 8 you see, for them. Took them back clean to the co-op. And of course, you'd put that in the bank. So you was always tried to save when you were children. And I carried on for years in the co-op bank when to get the smallest amount of money in. I mean, I remember saving £1 once to go to Skeggy for the day, to take them all, my husband as well. And it took me a year to save that £1.
The Leicester Poor Boys Summer Camp Association first sent a group of children to Mablethorpe in 1898. 2 years later, they changed their title to Summer Camp for Poor Boys and Girls. This film was taken in 1920 and shows a party headed for the Great Northern Railway Station on Belgrave Road, under the watchful eye of the Mayor of Leicester, Alderman Jabez Chaplin. Now, nearly 100 years since it started, the organisation is still going strong. And there are thousands of people in Leicester who still have vivid memories of taking their first trip to the seaside.
The journey was delightful because you'd never been on the train. Well, my brother had been the year previously, and of course he came home with tales of how nice it was, because obviously we'd never seen the sea. Then, of course, going on the beach and sorting out amongst the rocks all the different things, you know, that you've not seen before, watching the tide. I was disappointed when I got there to realise it wasn't all holiday. You still had lessons, but it was lovely.
For some of these children, often from large families, this could be the first time they'd had a bed to themselves. At the end of their holiday, each child will have put on around 4 pounds in weight.
The City of Leicester, on the occasion of its Civic Week, is paid a signal honour by the visit of the Lord Mayor of London.
I have very much pleasure in cutting this tape and thereby declaring open this new thoroughfare, Charles Street, for traffic from the north to the south of England forever.
Charles Street, the £1 million highway, was opened in 1932. car ownership at this time was pretty much confined to the very well-off. In 1930, the Leicester Automobile Association provided transport for the Leicester Guild of the Crippled. Though travel for some wasn't always so luxurious. Entertainment was laid on at Welby Hall, Scraptoft Hall and Knighton Grange. And the amateur performers certainly pulled out all the stops. But though Leicester is about as far from the coast as you can get in Britain, most of us still dreamed of a trip to the seaside.
When I was 15, before I went to the sea, and as we got to Yarmouth, they said, well, this is the sea. I thought it was awful, all muddy, dirty colour, and I thought, I expected to see it all blue, you know how you do.
We went to Blackpool and it was that cold, it made me ears go.
My first memory is going to Skegness, which I would think is about everybody's first memory in Leicester. And then if you were ambitious, you used to go to Yarmouth, because that was a bit further away. I mean, when you went to Yarmouth, you sort of sent a telegram home to say you got there safe.
Never bothered about holidays in them days much. We ain't got the money anyway, I mean, as far as I was concerned, and I was grown up before I went to the sea, so you didn't get paid in them days for your holidays. You got a week, you got August week, and most of the men from the factories and that used to try to get in, go whitewashing the factory out to any Robert that week.
The 1930s was to see a succession of street parties and parades. The first of these was the pageant of 1932, planned to draw the attention of the world to Leicester and to give a boost to its image in industry. The pageant's remembered now only for its spectacle. To the disappointment of its sponsors, few, if any, trade benefits came to the city. Still, everyone seemed to enjoy it.
Everybody was going about in all the costumes and everything all around Leicester before they went to the actual show.
You did see bits of it that people were rehearsing when it was all getting together. You know, the Vikings arriving on the Abbey Park Lake and all that sort of thing. But you see, you were so organised, really, you just saw your own little bit.
I was in the choir, in the school choir in the pageant. Well, it was a mass choir, I think. Choirs for all schools. I was in that, and I remember it being colourful and lots of people in it, as well as people coming to see it.
The pageant was celebrated by street parties held all around Leicester. This one is in Browning Street.
I lived in Peel Street at that time, and they all had parties. They closed all the street, and they had the whole length of the street with the tables out, and all the women and all of that all got the tea party, and all the kids were sitting down, and everybody know one another, and you took you as you was, not keeping up appearances.
Then came the Silver Jubilee of King George V in 1935, so Leicester put up the decorations again. The death of the King the following year was to cause national mourning. Thousands would flock to the town hall square to express their sense of loss. But with the coronation of 1937, Leicester was out on parade again. And who says recycling's a new thing? Some of these costumes look very familiar from the pageant. Unfortunately, not everybody in Leicester had time to watch the parade.
Well, I was down at the garage in Ash Street, and all the lorries were decorated and everything. And when it came to the time, they'd all gone to the parade, and there was a lorry in the garage, and the driver hadn't turned up, and I had to take it. It was cakes, co-op cake flour or something, and they put the pyramid thing on the back of this. It was a Daimler lorry, and it got all cakes. And we got to Wharf Street, can I swear? We got to Wharf Street, and we stopped with the traffic on Humberstone Road. It was coming from the far end of Wharf Street, and we stopped. And you know the rough ones down Wharf Street, and the women, one started it. They were stripping a lorry with the cakes, and one woman came to the side. She said, "Hey, you silly bugger, they're pinching all these cakes." I said, "They're not pinching all of them. I've got two, one for me, one for my mate under the sea."
Later that year, the Leicestershire Cooperative Society would invite Santa to lead their own Christmas parade. It wasn't only Santa who would have to wait anxiously for the parade to begin. There was Mickey and Minnie and the three little pigs as well. And the band. In 1939, the parades came to an end. Again, Britain was at war. This time, no one was safe. The danger came not from Zeppelins, as in World War I, but from long-range bombers. To survive, we'd all have to spend much of our time learning new skills, including how to put out incendiaries with a stirrup pump and a hose pipe. To protect itself, Leicester, like the rest of the country, turned out the lights. For much of the next 5 years, the town would be blacked out at night. Despite shortages, and despite much of the population drafted into war work or into the services, life at home continued.
The night of the bomb Leicester, I went to the Princess Cinema and they dropped a bomb on Lulhams. I set fire to that. And while we were in the Princess Cinema, they dropped one on Callio, so we had to come out of there, the smoke coming in the cinema, we had to come out. And that's when I got the biggest fright of my life that night. I was looking to see what happened, looking around in Granby Street, see what happened. All of a sudden I went down on the floor. There was a big sergeant policeman knocked me down because there was a whistler coming down. And he knocked me on the floor to save me.
Father away at the war, mother at home with 6 kids. And I suppose we were wild, but my mum, I actually remember making up her mind not to worry about things because they were really tough times. Fights, some dreadful fights in streets outside pubs with husbands are returning home on leave and their wives were with American soldiers. Quite to do, and they were fights, street fights like you would never see today. Nobody ever talks about them nowadays, but they were. The whole street was fighting, and then the white helmeted snowdrops, they call them, the American police would come and literally knock everybody out. Anybody who had a uniform on got bashed on the head.
Well, you had your ration book, and there was always a little bit of black market, particularly as we went up to Houghton on the Hill, you know, there'd be a few eggs. And the farm we used to go to, some friends of ours, they've got 3 daughters, and one of them was courting a GI. And I always remember they got married. In fact, she had bought my wedding dress, and they had a room at the farm downstairs, and I always remember when we wanted to have tea, he used to go and lift the eiderdown up from the bed, and the whole of under the bed was tinned fruit and everything. You see, they weren't short of anything. Because, I mean, if they offered a girl a pair of nylons, well, well.
The scheme, Holidays at Home, the government started this because, A, the rails were busy with, well, there weren't so many trains, all troops on them, ammunition and whatnot, and they didn't want people to travel. People couldn't travel to the coast because the coast was all guarded. So they brought their amusements to Leicester, and they erected a fairground on Blackbird Road, nearly opposite the Blackbird pub. And I don't know how long it was here for, but that was their holidays at home, to save people going to Skegness or to the sea or amusement parks to see the amusements. They brought them to Leicester.
The years immediately after the war saw Leicester entering an age of increased leisure. It might not have felt like it at the time. The government had urged us to work or want. There was almost full employment as the city struggled to rebuild its industries. Jones and Shipman was one of the companies which began to offer their employees more sports and social opportunities through their work. This was a welcome bonus at a time when there were far fewer leisure facilities provided by the council in Leicester. Some companies, like Lumley's, offered summer trips out. Then there were gala days like this one on G. Perry and Sons Sports Ground. With the restrictions of the war well behind us, more of us chose to spend our money watching our sport. But what was the week without its day of rest?
Sunday was a no-go area. You didn't go out Sunday. Classical music on the radio, nothing about it.
On a Sunday night, we'd walk from the Humberstone Road, Nedham Street, and we'd walk down to the Trocadero. There'd be a lot of us who would go down there. And you'd have a cup of coffee and a chat, and then you'd walk back. That's your Sunday evening.
She used to walk at London Road on Sunday evening. That's where I met my husband, incidentally. We used to go to Charles Street Chapel and then go from there and walk up London Road and meet your boyfriend.
1947, Leicester was to make the news across the country. The year the beer froze at the Bull's Head in Wigston. This would be the worst winter many of us could remember.
Well, it just came down. I mean, you know, we just had a heavy fall and things were just right for it settling. Very often when you get a heavy fall, it's slushy underneath and it soon goes, but this was all frozen and it came down and it just settled. They got the Italian prisoners of war to dig Tilton on the hill out. They were completely isolated. And they cleared the roadway so they could get vans up to the village. Near Grace Road, there was a low-lying piece of ground. I think the British Telecom keep the cables on it now, and they used to flood that. And it's only about, you know, perhaps 6 inches or a foot deep, but enough flood it all, you'd ice over and escape on that.
Throughout much of this century, it was always thought to be relatively safe for children and adults to play in the street. In 1919, there were only 100,000 cars in Britain. Up to 1930, the speed limit was 20 miles an hour. In the year before the driving licence came in 1935, there were 7,300 deaths on the road. This figure was to peak at over 9,000 in the first years of the blackout of World War II. But whatever the cost, the car was with us.
I mean, Tudor Road today is lined with cars from one side to the other. In the early days, in 1940s, you couldn't leave a car in the street at night without lights on. This was illegal.
Must have taken us, I would say, or at least 4 or 5 hours to get to Skegness. It was quite a long journey in those days because, you know, flat out you'd be 35, 40 would be really going some.
Never knew whether you were going to get there or not, you see. Progress had been made and then sacrificed during the war, so people bought cars that had been dug out of sheds or shaded dealers had got them, but you just couldn't buy a new one, so you had to put up with a second-hand and hope for the best.
If the car was to change the way we spent our leisure time, so would 100 electrical gadgets from washing machines to vacuum cleaners. Official TV service began in Leicester on December the 17th, 1949. For a month before this, test transmissions were broadcast at lunchtime. Goodman's on the High Street decided to rig up a demonstration set.
When people saw it, their eyes popped out their head. They stood and watched it. There were kiddies being lifted up to see it. There were, the pavement was absolutely crammed with people looking at it. And then, to top it up, a policeman came in and warned us that if we didn't shut the television off, we would be had up for obstruction.
The coronation of Elizabeth, and Father went out and bought this for my mother, and we all sat round and Mother prepared tea and sandwiches ready for the interlude, as we had then. We didn't have any commercials. We had what they called an interlude, which enabled you to go to the toilet and have a cup of tea, see? And we all sat round there, the whole family sat round there and watched this thing. And it was really, I was petrified that this was happening. This actual thing was happening and we were seeing it on this 9-inch screen.
It was a terrible wet day, if I remember right. And my parents had just obtained a television set, a 9-inch television set, quite a novelty in those days. They called it very dear. I mean, this 9-inch one cost over £50. Well, in those days you were lucky if you were earning a £5 a week. We watched most of the proceedings on the television. We did go in town to have a look round. It was packed